How are we doing? Okay, I got an awesome and a great, and I got a bunch of. I think the is it's summer in Ohio. Yeah, just a few months ago, not too many months ago, we were complaining about snow. Now you're going to complain about the heat. It's almost as if we like to complain. No, not us, right? No. All right, let's continue in the series. The series we are in Habakkuk, and the series is all about trusting the God who controls what we cannot understand. Because there are some things in life that we cannot understand. Am I correct? Yes. All right, and I'm not saying your spouse. No. All right. Man, you're on top of it today, Dan. Goodness gracious. All clean shaven and everything? Oh, you needed to lose. Okay, I got you. If for those you didn't hear, he said you need to lose a little bit of weight, so he just shaved off. You know, maybe you can tell that to Gabe because he's got a little bit of peach fuzz that he's trying to grow in. He says it's for, it's coming in really thick, Dad. Look at this. It's really dark. I would never embarrass him in front of everybody because that would just be terrible, right? Oh, crap. I'm sorry. I mean, he even brought friends to church and everything today. So, anyway, they're used to it by now. But let's jump into what we're going to talk about today. And how I want to start this out is that I don't know everybody's situation, but I do know that most people, most of us in life, we live within these split screens. Some of my computer guys are very familiar with this because you have multiple monitors on your desk, so you could do something over here and you could do something over here. You can watch whatever the stock market or I don't know. What do you watch on the other screen there, Danny? Hallmark? Whatever it is, do your work and however it goes. But or my football, college football is going to be coming up here in how many weeks? 6 weekends, but you can get the split screen so you can be totally confused because you have 4 games on your screen and you're watching this game, but the announcer's down here at this game and you're trying to be like, wait a second, that just doesn't make sense. Anywho, for the rest of us, we have to just accept the fact that a lot of us, even if we don't do it intentionally, we live in this time where we think that we can multitask and we can keep one eye on one thing and one eye on another, and everything's going to work out for us. And it's not going to cause us anxiety or anything, right? No, because what happens is we have one eye on our finances, whether it's account balances, retirement numbers, grocery bills, gas prices. Holy crap, they went up 60 cents and then went down a penny. And I think that is just so insulting. How about you? Like they raise it like 60 cents and then like a day later, oh, we're going to give you a break, and they bring it down a penny. I'd much rather them raise it than bring it down a penny. But anywho, that's just me. But whether we're looking at one screen that's on finances and all that, and then we're looking at another screen that's on the news and trying to figure out why the finances are like it is. In the screen in which you're watching with the news, whether it's whatever news channel you want to watch, whether it's leaning one side or the other, one side screaming at the other, and you got to pick a team. And if you don't pick a team, then and you got to be loud about the team in which you're on, there's a problem. So what you have is you have these screens going on, and you're trying to follow both, but as these 2 screens are going on, or multiple screens that are going on, there's still a slight humming underneath both of them. And what I mean, I'm not saying like a bad connection on the television, but this is a place where we don't normally listen or let ourselves listen. What we do is we know that we're watching these things, but deep down inside, you have this fear like, well, because this is happening in my 401k and because this is happening on the news, I know I need to do the right thing, and if I do the right thing, when I say right thing, I'm saying not the pragmatic thing, but the moral, the biblical thing, what God wants me to do, that might cost me in one of these screens or another. And what we do is like you have this fear that the faithfulness and safety, faithfulness to God, but safety in my securities of what I see in everything, they might not be on the same road. Now, I bring that illustration up and I paint that picture for us is because that's where Habakkuk is standing. As we opened up the book a couple weeks ago and as we continued on last week, what we understood is that Habakkuk's nation, the nation of Israel, the northern tribe has already been captured, has already been deported by the Assyrians, and now it's the southern tribe. It's Judah that is is going to be under attack. So his nation is coming apart. There's violence, and we talked about injustice and how the legal system, it stopped working. Not because the legal system itself was flawed, but because the people who are operating the legal system are flawed or were flawed. Anybody? We don't know anything about that, right? But what we have is, what we see Habakkuk do is he prays that prayer. He cries out to God and says, God, do something about this mess. Right? Anybody ever cry out to God to do something about this mess? There's a couple of us in here, right? Well, also along with that cry out to God, when we ask God to do something about this mess, if we were honest, there's a little disclosure or maybe even a secondary prayer that goes along with that cry out to God. And that secondary prayer is what we're going to see here get exposed in Habakkuk, but I really believe it could be exposed in our own life. Because what we see of those first 4 verses of Habakkuk was Habakkuk crying out saying, all this stuff's happening. But then in verse 5, you guys can all turn there, Habakkuk. It's in the Old Testament, and I'm not sneezing. But Habakkuk, in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5, God's going to answer him. God finally answers him, and as he answers him, let me tell you, and this is honest, this is upfront as your pastor, these words in which God tells Habakkuk don't seem as if they're very comforting. Because we think that we pray a prayer and God's going to kumbaya our happy little butt, and everything's going to be okay. Well, that's not what's happening. God is not going to comfort Habakkuk in the way in which he wants to, or he wants to, as Habakkuk wants to be comforted. And that's really that secondary prayer. It's like, God, do something about this mess, but do something in a way in which I like it. None of us would pray that prayer, right? God, fix this, but fix it like A, B, C, D, like this is how, step 1 is this, and God, you just bless this. I got it all figured out for you. You don't have to do the heavy work. No, what God is going to do here is he's going to do something better. He's not going to comfort this prophet who is crying out to him in a way that seems comforting. He's not going to give him the direct answer that he wants. He's going to do something much, much better. And trust me in this. Hold on throughout the whole sermon, because there's going to be some times you're going to want to hit the ejection button and pop out of here. But don't do it. If you got to pee, just cross your legs. I mean, Tom does it every week, and he makes it most days, right? You just go, oh, yeah, okay. He has no shame. What's that? You can't hit pause, no. I mean, the people online could try. I don't know how it works like that, but if you're watching this in future mode, whatever, yeah, you could hit pause. All right, but here's the big idea. Focus with me as we look at this text and just let this big idea kind of take shape, because the big idea is this: when God's answer is harder than your question, trust his character even when his methods make no sense. In Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 5, let's read 5 through 11 here. And mind you, this is Habakkuk has already spoken in the first 4 verses. Now it's God's turn to speak. Y'all there? Okay, I know you're waiting. I'm waiting too. I'm letting it's that pause for effect. Look among the nations and see. Wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. They all come for violence. All their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. Then they sweep like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. Like, all right, before we continue, like, if you heard Habakkuk's prayer, now you hear God's answer to Habakkuk's prayer. Do you think Habakkuk is feeling all warm and fuzzy inside? Well, wait a second. That's what God's supposed to make me feel, all warm and fuzzy, right? No. I mean, God doesn't want to beat us up, but He doesn't want us to be soft followers of Him. Like what we're going to see here, and this is going to be our first point here together, in this text in verse 5, is that God is writing a bigger and stranger story than the one that you're staring at. That's what He's telling Habakkuk. That's what we can draw from this. Because so far what Habakkuk's been doing is he's been doing all the talking. And I would even say like crying and complaining and pointing out all the wreckage. He cries out violence and injustice. The law is paralyzed. And then here in verse 5, when God finally speaks, there's no comfort in it. At least not the comfort in which Habakkuk is looking for. God's answer to this man who is completely shattered. Like, it's not as if God's looking at his situation and saying it's not real. No, God's looking at the situation, and He knows that Habakkuk is shattered. So God's answer to this shattered man is not a warm, fuzzy blanket. It's actually a command. He says, look among the nations to see, wonder, and be astounded. He goes on like, I'm doing a work in your days that you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't believe if I told you. Did you notice what God did not say here? What God did not say here is, ooh, man, I see it too. Or, oh, man, this is what Habakkuk really wanted. It's like, oh, it's okay. It'll be okay. You'll be just fine. Now, don't raise your hands, but how many of us pray that prayer like we're crying out to God, and we want God to tell us it'll be okay? Oh, it'll be just fine. Well, if someone is going to tell you that every time you pray and the answer to that prayer is in line with making you feel good, well, they're lying to you. Because what God did not say here was any of that. Like, oh, it'll be okay. It'll be okay, Johnny. Just hang in there, buddy. No, the first thing that God does is He directs Habakkuk's eyes somewhere else. So what do I mean? Habakkuk was looking at all of this destruction, and he's staring at this one thing, which was all the rot that was inside of Judah. He saw corruption on his own street. From the least to the greatest, he saw all this. And essentially what God is saying here is He's saying, lift up your eyes. He's like, I'm telling a story that runs way past your neighborhood. Like, too many times, what's that old saying that we miss the forest for the tree? Right? Like we're so here that we're not seeing everything that's going on out here. How about this? Here's an illustration for you. Imagine, and some of you would think that this is a reward, but imagine tearing a page out of a middle of a 1,000-page novel. Just one, you open it up and you just tear one page out somewhere in it. And then you read that page as if you're reading the entire book, that entire novel. You land on this, where you open it up, you land on this chapter, and you land on this page where the hero is betrayed and everything's falling apart. And as you're reading this, the hero's betrayed, everything's falling apart. Like the page is actually, like the ink is practically bleeding. And what you do is you throw that page, maybe even you crumble it up and you throw that page down, and you call the book, oh, it's a tragedy. But you're only holding one page. You're only holding this one page, and the author he's 40 chapters ahead of you. The author obviously knows how it ends, but you don't get a flip there. But you're trying to say everything is identified by this one page. That's Habakkuk here in verse 5. Now, don't think that like Habakkuk's got a reading problem, like he needs hooked on phonics because it worked for me. Oh my goodness. I think some of you are like, wait, I don't know if it did, preacher. But Habakkuk he's not reading this wrong. He's not reading the scenery wrong. It's that he's reading only one page out of this book. He's looking at one event that's in the total of history, and he's concluding everything. Notice what else God doesn't say here. He doesn't hand Habakkuk the ending. He doesn't say, oh, wait a second, let me walk you through this step by step. I'm going to tell you how the plot is. No. What God does to Habakkuk here, and as we'll see, is he says, no, listen. I'm writing this thing. And the story that I'm writing is bigger than the one page that's in your hand. Now, a lot of us need to hear that. Like, because too often we're running around with one page and we're like, wait a second, God, it's supposed to be like this or it's supposed to be like that. God's saying, no. Just like he's doing here, God tells us, and he tells Habakkuk, and we can see and we can glean from this, that God's saying, I'm doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told you. But we're running, but I got this page. And God said, wait a second. No. Listen. And that's the part I think that we have the hardest time with. Like, it's like stopping and listening. Get over yourself. Like, I say this myself. I promise you, I've stood in the mirror, maybe even recently, and say, what are you doing, you idiot? You idiot, Stimpy, right? No, nothing? Good. Well, she's pretty good at encouraging me, but she does kick me sometimes. But no, we have to. Like, we got to get over ourselves. Well, this isn't very, edifying here, preacher. I understand. But I told you, hold on, because what God is essentially doing, He's giving us one of those mind-blowing moments. Because what God does is God specializes in the unbelievable. Habakkuk couldn't wrap his head around all of this. So he's gonna see, he's heard what God said, and he's gonna see later what God's gonna do and how God's gonna work this. Maybe not even in his lifetime. He's up in glory going, I get it now. Some of us want that, I get it now, right now. That might not be. It just might not. I don't say that to beat us up or anything. No, I say that as an encouragement because we have to trust that God specializes in what God does. Not in what we want Him to do and then have just, God bless what I want. No, God's signature move is to work so far outside of our categories. Just think about it. He works so far outside of our categories that if He emailed us the blueprint of how it was going to work, we would go, I don't think it'll work. Or is that just me? So some of you are just like, I don't know. I mean, if God emailed me, I'd respond to that email. I wouldn't send that one to spam. What really? No, you would sit there and go, that ain't going to work. Why? Because we try to be our own gods. And what we want is God to do things the way in which we think they should be done. Now, this idea in which God communicates here to Habakkuk, like, I'm doing a work you just can't understand yet, or you wouldn't understand if I told you. This idea, it's not an isolated incident. It's not an idea that just stays here in this book or in the Old Testament. No, this reaches out, and I want to show you how far this text here in Habakkuk, how far it reaches out, because sometimes we can say, oh, that's for the Old Testament. No, we're not under the Old Covenant. We're under the New Covenant. Well, 600 years after, God says this to Habakkuk. The Apostle Paul, he stands up in a synagogue in Antioch. Not the Antioch in which he was sent out as a missionary. The other Antioch, which was in a little bit more pagan controlled area. But Paul stands up. The Apostle Paul stands up. So this is after the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. The Apostle Paul stands up and preaches Jesus, him crucified, him risen, him being, Christ being given as a forgiveness of sins. And when the Apostle Paul needs a text, that it's so weighty enough to carry the gospel, to package the gospel and to hold the gospel as he's proclaiming in this gathering in the synagogue, he reaches way back 600 years to this minor prophet named Habakkuk and what God told Habakkuk when things looked grim. You don't have to turn there, but in Acts 13:41, it talks about this, and he uses that, a work that you will not believe, even if one tells it to you. Like, I'm doing a work that you're not going to understand. And as he's explaining the gospel, he's saying, like, this was talked about. As God is doing a work in the Old Testament, he's doing the same work now, and we can't wrap our heads around it all the time. This line that God first spoke to Habakkuk about raising up this empire, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, but about raising up the empire from God in Paul's mouth, the line about the cross of Christ and empty tomb, the gospel. This is what is being used by the apostle as he reaches back, because he knows the weightiness of the gospel is that some people don't want to, or they don't understand and can't believe that God can forgive that in which they've done. This, you would not believe it if told. This is what we would call gospel vocabulary. Let's put that. File that away for a second. I'm going to come back to that here in a minute. But let's put ourselves in verse 5 of Habakkuk. So you've been praying like Habakkuk, right? Maybe some of us, right? But you're praying things like, God, do something about the economy. Do something about my finances. Do something about this country. Do something about our culture. And that's good. We should pray those prayers. But we're also probably praying things like, okay, God, this is the way in which I want you to do it. Notice that his first answer to Habakkuk is not the fix in which Habakkuk ordered. And I think sometimes that's a reality for us. We pray about certain situations, and we think that, okay, if God answers this prayer, he's going to answer it like this. Maybe he will sometimes. I don't know. Depends on what your prayer is, right? But what God does here is it doesn't line up with what Habakkuk's wanting. And what he's telling Habakkuk here, what God's answer is to Habakkuk, is that he says, listen, your framework your framework is way too small. The work that I'm doing, it's bigger. It might be a little bit stranger than what you would think of, but I'm writing this. I've got this. Maybe that's something that we need to remind ourselves. Like, God's got this. There's nothing we can say, nothing we can do, no way in which we can act, no way in which we cannot act, that God's going to be like, dang, I didn't see that coming. No, so here's the real question. Because I really believe that the real question isn't whether God will answer. I've said this plenty of times before. Like, I think too often we say things like, oh, yeah, I haven't heard God's answer yet. Oh, okay. And that can be true in some cases, but I tend to believe that God has answered the majority of our prayers, but the way in which he answered, it just doesn't, man, that just doesn't fit into my theology, God. Like, I asked you this, and it says if I ask anything in your name, then you'll give it to me. I said in Jesus' name, amen. Right? No. It's not the question of whether he will answer. He will answer. I firmly believe that. The question is whether you're ready for the answer that looks nothing like your request. Are we ready for that answer that just, it doesn't look like the request? Wait a second, God, I know I asked this, but I don't see how this is going to fix this. But just think about Habakkuk when God pulls back the camera and he shows Habakkuk, and he tells Habakkuk of this work in which he's doing. This is something hard. Habakkuk is not feeling all warm and fuzzy inside. It's probably one of the hardest things in the entire book. And what we see here, verses 6 through 10 here, and I really believe this is where our deep application can really come to life, is that God's answer can be harder than your question. And that's exactly how the cross works. Now, what do I mean? Well, if we look at starting in verse 6, after Habakkuk did his thing, God's telling him what's going to happen. God says, "For behold, I," stress on I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. Notice it doesn't say like permitting. Well, that's how a lot of preachers will look at this text and kind of, well, wait a second. No, it doesn't say permitting. It doesn't say I'm stepping back and letting it happen. No, it says that I am raising them up. God takes personal, active, and first-person responsibility in the very thing that's going to level his people here. He actually even says, like, this nation, this dreaded and fearsome nation, like their justice and dignity they don't have any justice and dignity. They write their own rules. Why? Because they don't answer to anybody. They write down their own law. They crown their own kings. They decide on what is right and what is wrong. And it says in verse 9 that they all come for violence. Now, did you catch that? Habakkuk was praying because violence was happening, and God is sending a nation that's violent? Wait a second. How can that even make sense? God, do you not see the violence? And God says, well, yeah, I do. And that answer is like, you want to see something done about that violence. God's answered him, and he says, like, I'm going to send violence. That song, like, you ain't seen nothing yet. But baby, you just ain't seen nothing yet. Right? No, that's what God's saying. Like, you haven't seen anything. Well, that doesn't sit well with me. That seems too hard. Well, you're right. It does seem too hard. It doesn't seem like it's very comforting, right? God's answer here wasn't gentler than the problem. It was actually harder than the problem. I got this going on, God, and I got this going on, and I can't do this. Really? You stubbed your toe, and you say like you're dying. No, I'm going to show you, I'm going to take you to where I'm where I am. I'm going to take you to where I have you, and you're not relying on yourself. Habakkuk, when he asked God to clean up his neighborhood, God says, all right, I'm going to clean up your neighborhood. But I'm going to send in this big wrecking ball to do it. Now, if we were honest, and I know we all are honest here, right? The temptation is to conclude that, man, a God who answers this way cannot possibly be good. Well, if we were to say that, watch this same pattern happens again 600 years later. If we fast forward another 600 years, we're standing outside of Jerusalem. We're standing on this hill where this innocent man, the most innocent man who ever lived, is being nailed to a Roman cross by a mob. Not only a mob, a corrupt court put him there. And then you have this coward who washes his hands in a basin and says, I don't want nothing to do with this. The single most evil act in human history is taking place. The murder of the Son of God. But yet a few days later, what we see is the Apostle Peter stands up and he says words referring to Jesus. He's talking to all the Israelites that are there, all these people who follow. They say, I follow after God. He addresses them, and he says, this Jesus, who's delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed. And it was done by the hands of lawless men. Now, I don't know if you caught both halves of what Peter says here. He says there's a definite plan of God, and then he says that there's hands of lawless men. And he uses this, it's in that same sentence there in Acts chapter 2. So we definitely say, well, God can't be good because, God causes sin. No, don't miss what I'm saying here. Don't miss what the text communicates. God did not put that wickedness in the hearts of men. God did not put that was theirs. That was theirs, and God holds them guilty for it. God is going to held Babylon guilty. He held those who put Christ to death guilty. Don't think that God's the author of sin. God is not the author of sin. He's the master over it. He's not the one that held the hammer. He held his perfect plan in his hand. Now, what he did, what God does is he took he took the evil that Babylon chose to do. He took the evil that these men who put Christ on the cross chose to do. But what God did and what God does is he bent it to an end that they never intended. I mean, we see this in the first. One of the first places is in Genesis, where even Joseph, that was sold by his brothers are coming to him and we're so sorry, and Joseph says what you intended for evil, God used for good. What we cannot fall into this trap or there's a contradiction here. No, there's no contradiction. The human heart is wicked above all else. It's evil. And what happens is God, he doesn't place that there. We're born that way. But what he can do is take something that is evil and turn it or bend it for good. And that's exactly what we see here. That we see that on Golgotha or Golgotha. Some of you like to say on Calvary, same place. We see it there, but we see this back here with Habakkuk in Habakkuk 1. But when we see it here, when it's in Habakkuk 1, it's on the beginning of the scale. And when we see it, Christ on the cross, That's an infinite scale. Because God took the most horrifying method imaginable. And what he did is he worked through it the greatest rescue that the universe has ever seen. Which means the pattern that we're seeing here in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 6, it's not a glitch in God's character. No, honestly, it's his signature move. This is how he works. He does things that we just don't fully understand, that if he told us, we wouldn't believe. The things that in the moment, they look like where, wait a second, God's been drinking too many and he fell off the throne again and we got to help him get back up. No. God's not lost his mind. He's not lost control. Just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that God's wrong. Listen, please, listen, because on that Friday, the Friday in which they nailed Christ to the cross, I'm sure that it didn't make sense to anybody. We see that. There's weeping and there's sobbing. Like Friday, no one was standing around the cross going, oh, I see how this is going to work. No, it looks like God abandoned the field. It looked like he's like up in the grandstands just enjoying his popcorn. Like evil's won. No, it wasn't until days later that they understand. It's not until the tomb is empty that any of this starts to make sense. It didn't make full sense. And quite honestly, it still doesn't make full sense. And that's not the point. Because we don't have to understand what God's doing. Like we think that we have to fully understand everything in which God's doing. Well, let me just say this. Like if you can't understand what God's doing, it's okay. That's not a hiccup or a flaw in your faith. The guy that God was talking to didn't understand what God was doing. That's all right, because if his methods make no sense, what we can still do is trust his character. We can still trust God even though we don't understand why he's doing what it is that he's doing. Because the fact of the matter is we don't measure his heart. We don't measure God's heart by the method, the method in which we see. We measure it by the method in which he's finished already. On the cross, Jesus says, "It is finished." Let's move into verse 11 here in Habakkuk chapter 1, because what we see here is that the God that you can't understand still holds everyone and everything in his hand. So Babylon's going to come. And as Babylon comes, like for a few verses here, it looks like it's unstoppable. He says, swifter than leopards and fiercer than wolves and scoffing at kings, laughing at fortresses. Now, if this passage in Habakkuk ended in verse 10, you'd slam your Bible shut and you would say, like, well, yeah, God is up in the grandstands just watching. He doesn't really care. No, it doesn't end there, though. It goes on. There's more verses there. Verse 11, it says, then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. Now, those two words change everything. Guilty men. Remember that fence we kind of put up a little bit ago when I said God is not the author of sin and God does not cause us to sin? No. It comes back to play, because even though it says that God, he's raising up the Chaldeans, but in the very same breath as he's saying, I'm raising them up, but they're guilty. They're used by God, but they're still accountable to God. God doesn't grade the Babylonians on a curve just because he happened to use them. No, this instrument that's in his hand that he uses is still an instrument that he will judge. We'll see that in chapter 2, and we'll see that the wrecking ball gets wrecked, but until then, he says that they're guilty. But why are they guilty? It makes very clear what it is. The charge against Babylon, even though they were being used by God, the charge against Babylon is that they looked at their own strength, their army and their economy in this. It's an unstoppable machine. We're going to go. They looked to that and they bowed down. They bowed down to their own strength. They made a god out of their own power. Like, it's all about me, and look at what I've done. Look what I've accomplished. Look where I'm at. I don't know about you, but that should make some of us nervous. Because sometimes we can be that Babylon and say, look what I've done, and not give glory to God where glory is due. In this text here, this verse, there's a quiet question that it asks us. Because what we have to do is look into this in the security that that we get so terrified of losing, whether it's at our own strength or whatever it is, our own accomplishments. Whether that security is the bank account or our plan or our vocation, whatever it is. Here's a question I think that we need to ask ourselves. What if that security, what if it stopped being a gift from God and started being a God? Like, let that set for a second. I don't think that we look at everything good in our life and say, oh, you know that, I don't want to make that a God. No. There's nothing wrong, because the Bible is clear that God is a loving Father. He wants to bless us. But do we take those gifts that He has given us? I don't care if it's time or if it's talent or if it's treasure. Like, God can give us those things as gifts, but do we let those gifts become gods? That's where the problem comes in. What if the thing that we're trying to hold on so tightly to that our knuckles are turning white, that it's not just our safety net, but it's the actual thing that we've made God in our life? Babylon's sin, it wasn't that they were strong, it was that they worshiped their strength. And a nation that worships its own might, and I would even say this about the Stars and Stripes, the great US of A. Same thing, like if we worship our might, and then I would say on a personal level, a Christian who worships their own way, like that's exactly what God's talking against here. That's what he's saying. Like, if we worship our own might, if we worship our own way, we're standing exactly on the exact same thing in verse 11 that God brings down. But there is a glimmer of hope in this all. And not just a glimmer, it's actually a real big, bright, shining spotlight. But we don't want to look at it, we don't look too often to this. But we need to, because there's a beauty in all of this. That amidst all of this craziness and maybe where we misplace where we're to focus, God's still gracious. The gospel is still true. And the beauty of the gospel that's hiding inside of this indictment here, whether it's Babylon made a god of its own might, or whether it's like how a Christian makes a god of their own way or their own strength, what Jesus did, the King of the universe, the one who created everything, like He could have saved Himself from that cross. He even says, like, there was a legion of angels just chomping at the bit. Like they were waiting for Jesus just to say the word. But no, Jesus decided not to. He chose not to. He didn't put His faith, and I know some are like, wait a second, how can Jesus have faith? Understand that Jesus had faith in the Father, what the Father was doing. He didn't know fully what he was doing. Well, wait a second, he's God. I know, that's what the part that I don't understand either. But it says that he emptied himself of all that was that divine, and so that he could or suffer like we suffer, and so that he could be tempted like we are tempted, but so that he can have faith like we have faith. And it actually says that through his faith he was perfected. That's what the writer of Hebrews says. So how that all lines up, I don't know. Just in the same sense of I don't understand how Jesus doesn't know when he's coming back, but the Father does. I know that some of you might have some charts that you can show me. Fine. Think you're kooky. But there are some things that we just don't know. And just because I can't understand it doesn't mean that changes that I can trust or cannot trust. Some of you are like, I don't know if I don't understand it, I can't trust that. No, but I think that there's sometimes like, because I don't understand, it makes me trust him even more. I trust his character. Because quite frankly, this verse in which we're looking at here, this passage, it can terrify us. This is the same passage that can actually give us comfort. Because God, who holds the guilty, and the guilty that are in his hand, he says this. The people that are going to, the nation that's going to crush God's people is not outside of the control of God. What does that mean? Well, maybe for somebody, for a lot of us, the thing you cannot understand, loss of whatever something, that security you have in your life, loss of a loved one. Loss of a job, I don't know. Maybe a diagnosis. Maybe the market is crashing. Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's just this, I cannot understand the mess in which everything is that's going on around us. Well, the thing that you cannot understand is not roaming loose outside of the grip of God. Everything and everyone still reports to him. Why is that comforting? Well, the very bigness of God that makes him so hard to understand in verse 6 about this, I'm sending this nation, I'm building up this nation or raising up this nation to come and to have execute violence over all the people. Like the very bigness of God that makes him or communicates to us in verse 6 is the only bigness that's large enough to hold on to verse 11. What do I mean? If God's a small God that you could just figure out, if you could figure out God, that's a God who cannot save you. A God you can't understand, that his ways are higher than your ways, his thoughts are higher than your thoughts. That's a God who does and can hold everything. That's the difference between finite, like our pea brains, and infinite. And that's the trade that's happening here in Habakkuk. Habakkuk is being offered this thing like, okay, you're not going to understand this, but this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do. And that same trade is on the table for us today. You're not going to fully understand what I'm doing all the time, every time. But you got to trust me through it. The fact of the matter is that we don't get the explanation. What we get is God. So let me wrap this up. And I want to do this by coming back to that split screen analogy that I gave you. One eye on the finances or whatever that security is, one eye on the news or the culture, everything going on. But that hum, that low hum underneath all of it, what's the saying? Like I'm praying like Habakkuk. I'm saying, God, do something. But also that God's answer, that it's just not the way in which you would draw it up to be. The way in which you would answer it. what we see is that God didn't hand Habakkuk that explanation. What God handed him was himself. He didn't shrink the problem, because that's what we want sometimes. It's like, God, shrink this problem down. Make it more manageable. No, he didn't shrink the problem down to something more manageable. Actually, what God did is he revealed how big and how infinite he is. He's a God that's too big to fit inside that question. A God who writes the story bigger and stranger than what we would think. Remember that page in our hand. A God who took the worst Friday in human history and turned it into the most glorious Sunday ever. A God who holds everything, even the guilty, even the God-defying Babylonians. God gives an answer, not making that problem smaller, but revealing his bigness in all of it and who he is. So here's what this whole passage thus far has been driving towards is like, we're not always going to understand. We're not always going to understand every method in which God does. But what we can understand about God, or the message and the plan in which God has, is that one, we can understand the plan from beginning to end, that it happened on the cross. What Christ finished there. Because sometimes we don't get the full explanation on this side of glory of what's going on, but we get the finished work of the cross. And I'll end with this. A God who would go that far, through that darkness, to buy you, to buy me back to him, to redeem us, that God's already earned the trust of anything and everything in which you have. He's earned that trust. Even if you can't understand it, even if we can't understand everything that's going on, he's earned that. So when his methods make no sense, we need to trust his character. Now with that, I want us to, we're gonna close up the teaching here. We're gonna open prayer if anybody wants to pray. I warned you, like this was tough. Like, this is like, I don't think people like to hear that God doesn't answer their prayers like they think he should answer. That's difficult. I get it. Sometimes we're like, God, what are you doing? And God's saying, just trust me. Just trust me. That there is something, and I've wrestled with this for many years. Like, God, why don't you just make yourself so clear? Write your name in the sky. Do something like that, so that like people will come to know you and will trust you and everything. And the continual response in which I get is that the passage out of Hebrews where it says that it is without faith it is impossible to please God. We have to have faith that he is who he says he is, and he'll do what he says he's going to do. And sometimes when we don't understand it, that we're still trusting him through all of that. So as we finish up our time teaching, and we'll open up prayer. The prayer team will be up here. If you want to go. You want to stay, sing, worship, whatever you want to do, you can do. But all I ask is the same thing I ask of myself. Like, am I trusting God? It doesn't mean that we go on autopilot and I don't have any control. No. We do. The control in which we have is just to trust God in what he's doing. But I don't understand. Yeah, I know. I get it. I don't understand either. But I trust in what he is doing is greater than what I would come up with. It's better than what I would come up with. No, I'm good at this. Well, no, I don't think you are. Like, we make mistakes. I don't even have to ask if anybody's made a mistake. I mean, even today, like, yes, yeah. I get we make mistakes. We say things we don't mean. We do things we shouldn't do. Or, like, we make mistakes. Sin is continually, like, crouching at the door, wanting to just take over our lives. But we got to trust God that his work on the cross, where he says, it is finished, that's enough. So with that, let me pray, and we'll do the next step, whatever that next step is. God, we do thank you. Lord, we do trust you. I'm sure that there are not everybody in this this room would say, I fully trust, or maybe they would say it, but they don't live that. I don't know. It's not up to me to judge. But God, my prayer is that we can trust you more. I'm not asking that you send more of Babylon into our life. Not saying that. What I'm saying is, like, what you've already communicated to us, what you've already revealed to us, that we could trust you in those areas. And God, be faithful to what you want us to do. Maybe it's not the easiest thing, but if it's the right thing, if it's from you, it is the right thing. Let us not be the judge over what is right and what we should do and what we shouldn't do, but let us be the judge over what it is you tell us to do. And then let us weigh everything by that, by your word. But God, ultimately, let us just be better at trusting you. Through the big things, through the little things, through the valleys, through the mountaintops, all along the way, until we see you in glory, Lord. Let us walk by faith, not by sight. Let us do it boldly. Let us do it in a way that is most glorifying to you. God, we do thank you for what you're doing, what you've done, and what you will do. And we give you all the glory and everything. Pray this in your name, Jesus, and all God's people said.